The first time he fought back, he broke his father's jaw with a mining spanner. The second time, he didn't stop until the man stopped moving. This is the story of Darth Bane, born in the mines, raised by pain. But long before he rewrote the future of the Sith, before the thought bomb, before the rule of two, he was just a boy named Dessel, a name whispered in the shadows of a forgotten planet. A name not born in greatness, but in hatred. Apatros was not a place that raised children. It buried them. Gray rock, bitter cold, a sky so pale it looked sick. For generations, the people of Apatros had mined cortosis for the Republic war machine, digging deeper into the world's veins like parasites feeding on their own planet. No trees, no stars, just dust. And men too tired to dream. Dessel was born in one of the worker barracks on the edge of the Eastern Trench Line. He never knew his mother. She died not long after he was born, though no one told him how. His father, Hurst, told him she'd tried to escape her duty, that she was weak, that she deserved what she got. Whether that was true, Dessel never knew, but the way Hurst said it made the boy feel like he was the one who'd killed her. From his earliest memory, Hurst's voice echoed in every corner of his world. Not just loud, sharp, a voice that pierced. It followed him through the rusted halls, down into the mines, into sleep. Sometimes, Dessel wished he could crawl deeper into the tunnels and disappear. But even in silence, the voice never left him. The other miners didn't say much. Some pitied him. Others turned away. On Apatros, there were no saviors, only survivors, and no one risked crossing Hurst, especially when he drank. When Hurst drank, he stopped seeing his son, and started seeing the life that was stolen from him. The Republic draft that had passed him by, the mining contract that chained him to a planet of ash, the crushed bones in his knees, the blood beneath his fingernails. In Dessel's face, he saw failure. In Dessel's eyes, he saw his own. And so, he hit him. Not out of anger, not out of heat, but cold, like a routine, like sharpening a blade. Dessel didn't cry anymore. Not after the 4th year, not after the 3rd busted lip. Tears didn't help. Screaming made it worse, so he learned to go quiet like the tunnels. By 7, he was already working the lifts. By 9, he was handling explosives. When the sirens blared for a cave-in, he didn't flinch. He'd already buried too much inside himself. They said cortosis was rare, valuable, that it was stronger than durasteel, resistant to lightsabers. But the irony was bitter. The very mineral that protected Jedi from death was the same mineral that slowly killed the miners who extracted it. Dust in the lungs, shattered spines, slow suffocation, all in silence. And in that silence, Dessel began to change. He didn't speak much, but he listened. He watched. When 2 foremen fought over ration shares, Dessel memorized the angles. When a miner sabotaged another's cart, Dessel marked the timing. He noticed things, patterns, weaknesses, shadows. Even then, he didn't know why. He only knew that something was always there, underneath his skin. A tension, a storm with no wind. When he clenched his fists too tight, lights flickered. When he got angry, rocks seemed to shift. Quiet things, hidden things, but real. He never told anyone. Because on Apatros, there were 2 types of power, the kind that broke you, and the kind you buried deep enough that no one could take it away. And Dessel was learning how to bury everything. His father never apologized. Not once. The next morning, the broken jaw was wrapped in synth bandage and rage. The bruises on Dessel's arms were gone, but the silence remained. A silence deeper than the mind's. One that stretched between them like a chasm neither wanted to cross. But even in silence, Hurst still found ways to speak. A slammed cup, a heavy boot step, a longer shift underground. He didn't need words. Dessel had already learned to read his father's moods by the way he chewed, the way he tightened his fists, the way he stared too long at nothing at all. There were no schools on Apatros, no stories, no toys, no holidays. There were only drills, loaders, and pain. And a boy who knew that any wrong glance might be the next excuse. The other miners didn't interfere. They had their own ghosts, their own children, maybe, or none at all. Some of them stared too long at Dessel. Others looked away. The ones who looked away were worse. The worst part was the voice. Dessel could still hear his father's voice even when he wasn't in the room, even when he was kilometers underground. It wasn't just memory, it lived inside him. A growl under the surface, always ready to blame him, even when he didn't do anything wrong. Especially when he didn't. The supervisors noticed that Dessel worked harder than most, that he didn't complain, that he stayed late, took the dangerous loads, and never cracked. What they didn't know was that the mine wasn't more dangerous than home. The drills didn't hit back. The cave-ins didn't insult him. In the mine, Dessel could breathe. Most nights, he didn't sleep, or if he did, he slept in pieces. His dreams weren't dreams at all. They were memories distorted, stretched, and raw. Sometimes, he was small again, hiding under the workbench. Other times, he was older, taller, his fists red with blood. Sometimes he won, sometimes he didn't. But no matter how the dream ended, he always woke up with his jaw clenched and his hands shaking. By age 10, Dessel had stopped asking questions, not just aloud in his own mind. He stopped asking why his father hated him, why his mother died, why no one helped. He stopped pretending the galaxy cared. And slowly, something inside him shifted. It wasn't anger, not anymore. Anger burns out. This was colder, more focused. He stopped reacting, stopped flinching. He watched instead, measured. Every time Hurst tried to provoke him, Dessel gave him nothing. And Hurst hated it. The beatings got worse, but they didn't get to him. Not really, because Dessel had figured something out. The old man needed him to feel small, needed him to scream. If he didn't, if he stayed quiet, then he was the one in control. For the first time in his life, Dessel felt it. Control. Just a taste, just a flicker, but it changed him. He began to speak less to others, even less than before, but he listened more. He heard things others missed: whispered plans, secret ration trades, broken systems. He learned how to move unseen, when to hold his breath, when to lie, but most importantly, he learned when to wait. He wasn't strong enough to fight his father yet, not really, but he would be. One day, the drills would keep getting heavier, the muscles would grow, and one day, Hurst would look into his son's eyes and see a stranger. A stranger who didn't blink. A stranger who had already stopped being afraid. It didn't happen during a fight. It didn't happen during a drunken rage or one of Hurst's explosive breakdowns. It happened in silence during a meal, under the flickering light of the mess hall. Dozens of miners, canned food, stale air, and a voice. "Should have died with your mother," Hurst muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Dessel didn't move, he didn't flinch. He just stared at the man's broken jaw, the one he shattered a year earlier. It had healed crooked. The scar never fully faded. But the words hung in the air like poison. The room grew quiet. That was the moment, not the insult, not the shame, but the silence that followed, the way no one said anything, the way no one looked at him. He wasn't even worth defending. When it was over, Dessel stood up and walked out. Slowly, calmly. He didn't run. He didn't speak. But he wasn't angry. Not yet. The anger came later that night when he couldn't sleep, when the words echoed in his head, again and again. Should have died with your mother. He imagined it, his mother's face, not the real one, because he'd never seen it, but something soft, something imagined, something better than this. And he imagined her dying. Alone, afraid, maybe calling out for someone who never came, maybe calling his name. And now, Hurst, the man who called himself a father, said he should have died with her. That's when the anger came. Not like a fire, not like heat. It came like a hand around his throat, tight, cold, absolute. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move, but his mind was clear, crystal clear. The next morning, he didn't go to the mines. He followed Hurst. The man liked to take a longer route back after shift, past the abandoned subtunnels. Quieter, darker. Dessel had followed him before. Never this close, never with a weapon. But this time, the vibro knife in his hand wasn't for protection. It was for memory. He waited. Hurst stopped to piss against a wall, muttering to himself about nothing. His back turned. Dessel moved without thinking. Quiet steps, perfect timing. He raised the knife. But Hurst turned, and for the first time in Dessel's life, the man looked afraid. It wasn't fear of the knife. It wasn't even fear of death. It was fear of him. Dessel's hand didn't shake. His grip didn't falter. The knife hovered at his father's throat, so close he could see Hurst's pulse beating under the skin. And in that frozen moment, something broke. Not in Hurst. In Dessel. He felt power. Real power. Not imagined, not borrowed. It flowed through his muscles like electricity. His vision sharpened, his heartbeat slowed. The force, though he didn't know the name, surged around him. He was no longer the boy beneath the bruises. He was the one holding the blade. And yet, he didn't strike. He didn't need to. The fear was enough. He stepped back, dropped the knife, walked away. Hurst never spoke to him again. Not really. He didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't touch him. He didn't have to. Because something had changed. Dessel didn't just survive anymore. He dominated. That night, he stood at the edge of the trench line, staring into the smoke of the lower shafts. He didn't feel proud. He didn't feel guilt. He felt nothing. And in that nothing, he found peace. Not because he won, but because for the first time, he could have. The boy who once counted bruises now counted moments. And this moment would never leave him. The peace didn't last. It never did on Apatros. 2 weeks after the knife, a Republic survey team landed near the mining compound. Corporate bureaucrats inspecting productivity metrics, ore quotas, and labor statistics. They wore clean boots and smelled like sterilized air. Dessel watched them from a distance. They didn't see him. Men like that never did. But one of the crew chiefs made a mistake, a familiar one. He accused Dessel of skimming credits from a Cortosis shipment. The charge was baseless, invented to cover his own failures. But in the world of contract labor, guilt was just a formality. They cornered Dessel in a processing room behind the east shaft, 4 of them. Miners. Bigger than him, older, drunk. They weren't there to talk. The first one swung. Dessel ducked, felt the wind off the man's fist scrape past his jaw. He moved on instinct, low, fast, brutal. The second attacker caught a boot to the knee and collapsed with a scream. The rest rushed in. He didn't hesitate. He didn't stop. When it was over, 2 men were unconscious. One wasn't breathing. The last one was crawling away with blood pouring from his face. And Dessel was still standing, covered in cuts, breathing hard, but standing. That was the moment he realized he could never stay here. Not because they'd arrest him, not because he might be killed, but because the mine could no longer contain what he was becoming. Word spread fast, faster than the blood dried. By nightfall, security forces were already looking for him. The charge wasn't just assault, it was murder. Self-defense didn't matter. Not to the company, not to the Republic. The labor contract didn't protect him, it owned him. And now it wanted to bury him. He didn't go home. He didn't try to plead his case. He didn't say goodbye. Instead, he went to the only person he knew who might have a way out, a man who dealt sabak in the lower dormitory halls. A man who sometimes whispered about smugglers, bribes, and off-world travel. The man didn't ask questions. He just asked for credits. Dessel gave him everything he had. A ship was leaving that night. No manifest, no inspection. Just heat from the engines and silence in the hold. As he stood in the cargo bay, watching Apatros shrink into the void, Dessel didn't look back. Not even once. There was nothing to look back to. No family, no friends, no name. Just scars. That was the last time anyone on Apatros saw him. The reports listed him as missing, later, presumed dead. The man who emerged on the other side was not Dessel anymore. Not truly. He had no formal education, no training, no place in the stars. But he had a strength he couldn't explain, a feeling that the galaxy had wronged him, and he was meant to take something back. For the first time in his life, he was unchained. But the blood on his hands was still warm. And in the quiet of that stolen ship, in the echo of his thoughts, the voices from Apatros still whispered. Not just his father's, but something older, something deeper, something dark. It started with a game of sabak. A dirty cantina, off-world moon, the kind of place where names were traded for drink tokens and men measured power in silence. Dessel sat with 4 others, miners, traders, off-duty Republic soldiers. One of them wore an officer's badge carelessly, a man used to being feared by those too tired to resist. The hand was tense, credits on the line. Dessel had nothing in his hand, but his eyes told a different story. Calm, cold, measured. The officer didn't like it. He accused Dessel of cheating. The room went quiet. Dessel said nothing. He didn't protest, didn't explain, just looked up with that same stillness, the one that had silenced his father, the one that had grown sharper since leaving Apatros. The officer stood, reached for something, maybe a blaster, maybe pride. Dessel moved first. He didn't think. He just reacted. A broken bottle, a flash of motion, and the man was on the ground, clutching his throat. Blood pooled fast. Too fast. The others backed away. No one screamed. No one helped. And Dessel didn't run. He stood over the body, breathing slow, waiting for the next sound. It never came. In that moment, something changed. He hadn't wanted to kill, but he hadn't cared enough not to. It wasn't the murder that stayed with him, it was the silence that followed. No guilt, no terror, only clarity. The local enforcers would be here soon. The Republic didn't care about minors, but killing an officer, that would cost him his life. Unless someone else got to him first. That night, in the back corner of a cargo port, a man in black robes approached him. Not a Jedi, not Republic, but something else. He didn't ask about the murder. He didn't ask Dessel's name. He only asked one thing. What did it feel like? Dessel didn't answer, but the man smiled as if he already knew. He called himself a recruiter for the Sith Brotherhood, said they needed men like him, strong, ruthless, untouched by the Jedi's chains. He spoke of war, of enemies, of power. Dessel said nothing, but when the transport arrived, he boarded it. Not because he trusted them, but because whatever he was running from, he couldn't outrun himself. The ship left without lights. No words were exchanged, no questions asked. And in that cold metal silence, Dessel realized something important. He had never made a choice before. Not really. Every moment on Apatros was survival. Every bruise, every scream, every stare at the floor, all of it had been reaction, submission, escape. But this was the first time he stepped into the unknown by his own will. And it felt like stepping into fire. The other recruits were older. Some had military training. Some had blood on their hands. Dessel didn't ask. He didn't speak much, but they noticed him. Something about the way he watched, the way he moved, like a man already used to killing. He had no idea where they were going, what waited for him, or what Sith truly meant. But something inside him stirred at the name. It felt like a word he'd known his whole life, like a voice that had always been whispering, now finally given form. He didn't know it yet, but Dessel was already gone. And in his place, something new was being born. Not a killer, not a soldier, but a shadow, waiting to take shape. The journey to Phaseera was long, cold, and silent. They didn't call it transport, they called it assignment. But for the men inside, it felt like exile. The Brotherhood of Darkness didn't welcome recruits, it consumed them. Dessel was issued a rifle, a rations kit, and a number. No name, no past. The others joked, fought, cursed the Jedi, and bragged about kills they hadn't earned. Dessel just listened. Always listening. Phaseera was a wasteland, a scarred world soaked in smoke and metal, once fertile, now poisoned by war. The air shimmered with plasma residue. The soil was gray and wet from blood and rain that never cleaned anything. The Sith army was massive, not a brotherhood of mystics, but a machine. Thousands of soldiers, mercenaries, dark Jedi, lords who commanded legions with a gesture. And somewhere above them all, Lord Khan, the man who promised to bring peace through absolute power. Dessel didn't care about ideology. He cared about survival. The first battle came at dawn. The Republic had entrenched artillery on the ridge, their white armored troopers marked with crimson insignias. The order came down: advance through the trench lines. No tactics, just slaughter. Blaster fire burned the fog red. Men screamed. Others disappeared in bursts of light. Dessel moved like he had in the mines, deliberate, silent, efficient. He fired only when he could see his target's eyes. And every time he pulled the trigger, he felt that same calm, the same void he'd found with the knife at his father's throat. But this time, it was easier. Hours passed. The ridge didn't fall. The air filled with the stench of plasma and burnt flesh. The Sith commanders screamed orders that no one followed. When a dark Jedi tried to retreat, Dessel shot him too. Not out of loyalty, out of necessity. The next morning, he was still alive. Most weren't. His commanding officer, a scarred lieutenant named Ulabor, stared at him for a long time before saying, "You don't fight like a man. You fight like you've already died." Dessel didn't respond. He didn't need to. Days turned into weeks. Battles blurred together. Dessel stopped remembering faces. He remembered sounds instead: the click of overheating rifles, the hiss of sabers, the heavy boots crushing mud over the dead. The Sith didn't win by strategy. They won by endurance. They bled until the enemy broke, and Dessel didn't break. He began to sense things before they happened: ambushes, movements, artillery strikes seconds before they landed. He couldn't explain it. No one could. But the men around him started to notice. They began following him. Not the officers, not the lords, him. It wasn't leadership. It was instinct. The troops said the Force guided him. Dessel didn't understand what that meant. He only knew that in battle, everything slowed. He could see where death was coming from, and he always moved first. Phaseera consumed entire companies in a single night, but Dessel's unit, the ones who followed him, kept surviving. Some said he was lucky, others said cursed. Both were right. Then came the siege of the Iron City, a month-long assault that broke armies. The Republic brought Jedi Knights to the front. Real ones, calm, focused, radiating light through the smoke. Dessel watched them from behind shattered barricades. They weren't like the soldiers. They moved with grace, precision, purpose. He hated them instantly. Not because they fought well, but because they didn't suffer. They didn't feel. They floated above pain, untouched by it. And for the first time since Apatros, Dessel wanted to make someone feel. He didn't know it yet, but the next battle would give him that chance. And when it did, the galaxy would remember the name Dessel, though not for long. Because soon, there would be another name. A darker one. The one that would echo in fear. The Jedi came at dawn. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't need to. Their presence moved through the smoke like light breaking through rot. Dessel felt it before he saw them, the strange calm that made his chest tighten. It wasn't fear, it was anger. Something inside him rejected their peace. The battle for the Iron City had already turned to chaos. Buildings burned from orbital strikes. Craters swallowed entire squads. Dessel's unit had been pushed back behind a line of shattered transports, pinned down by Republic artillery. Every few seconds, plasma fire cut through the fog, carving screams into silence. And then, they appeared. 2 Jedi Knights, hoods drawn back. Their sabers glowed in the haze, green and blue slicing through flame and rain. They moved like ghosts, deflecting bolts, cutting down Sith troopers as if mercy were a weapon. Dessel froze, not from awe but from focus. Everything slowed, the noise dimmed. Even the explosions seemed distant. The Force, though he didn't yet name it, drew everything into sharp lines. The rhythm of their movement, the timing between their steps, the way one hesitated half a heartbeat before each parry. He could see it all. When the first Jedi reached him, Dessel didn't retreat, he stepped in. The saber missed by inches. He fired point blank into the Jedi's throat, the bolt burning through before the man could react. The second Jedi turned, shocked, and that moment of shock was enough. Dessel ripped a fallen blaster from the ground and fired 3 times into the knight's chest. The body fell still. The saber hissed out. It was over in seconds. When his men saw it, they stopped shooting. No orders were given, no words, just silence. And then someone whispered it, the word that would follow him for the rest of the war. Butcher. It wasn't praise, it wasn't insult, it was fear given a name. From that day on, the title spread. The Butcher of Phaseera, the man who killed Jedi without a saber. The miner who fought like the Force itself was angry through him. The commanders noticed, so did the Dark Lords. His name reached ears far above the battlefield. Some wanted to recruit him, others wanted to study him. But Dessel wanted nothing. No medals, no rank, no reward. He only wanted the next fight. Because in battle, he felt something no drink or sleep could give: quiet. The same quiet that came after pain. The silence that used to follow his father's voice. Only now, it came with blood and power. The Jedi were supposed to be symbols of light, but Dessel saw only arrogance. They fought as if the galaxy belonged to them, as if their peace justified the bodies they left behind. So, he gave them back their silence, one cut, one shot, one victory at a time. Weeks passed. The Republic began to retreat. Every victory hardened him further. His men followed him without hesitation now. They didn't need courage. They needed him. And Dessel needed the war. He slept less, ate less. His hands shook when the battle stopped. But when the fighting resumed, the tremors vanished. The Force surged through him again, heavy and electric. One night, under the crimson sky of Phaseera, he stood alone among the corpses. The fires had died. The smell of blood and carbon filled the wind. He stared at his reflection in a pool of rainwater, face blackened by ash, eyes empty. And he realized something terrifying. He no longer recognized the man staring back. He wasn't the miner from Apatros. He wasn't even Dessel anymore. He was what war had made him. The Butcher. And he wasn't sure he wanted to be anything else. The war didn't end with celebration. It ended with silence. When the last Republic transport fled the skies of Phaseera, the Brotherhood called it a triumph. Lord Khan himself broadcast a message across every channel, proclaiming unity, strength, destiny fulfilled. The soldiers cheered. The Lord smiled. The dead were counted as martyrs. But Dessel didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He just stood in the mud, watching the smoke drift over the wreckage of a world no one would ever rebuild. Victory meant nothing to him. The quiet felt heavier than the noise. It pressed against his chest, filled the gaps between his thoughts. Every face he'd seen die returned in fragments, flashes of light, screams cut short, blood washed away by rain. None of them stayed long. None of them mattered. Because they were all part of the same truth. War had not changed him. It had revealed him. The Butcher wasn't a mask. It was his reflection. And that terrified him more than any Jedi ever could. His unit was disbanded weeks later. Some were reassigned to other fronts, some deserted. A few joined the Dark Jedi ranks, desperate to learn the power they had witnessed but never understood. Dessel was summoned to a field command tent. Inside, a robed figure waited, a man older than the rest, his eyes deep and cold. Lord Copex. He didn't ask questions, he just observed, studied. You fought without fear, the Lord said quietly. You killed Jedi. You survived Phaseera. Do you know what that means? Dessel shook his head. It means the Force is with you, and whether you know it or not, it answers you. The words didn't comfort him. They felt like a verdict. Copex offered him a choice: remain a soldier or travel to Korriban, the ancient world where the true Sith were trained. The choice was supposed to feel like opportunity, but to Dessel, it sounded like inevitability. He accepted, not because he wanted power, but because he didn't know how to live without war. When he left Phaseera, the troops saluted him. Some whispered his title again, half in awe, half in fear. The Butcher. He hated it, but he didn't correct them. On the transport, he sat alone, staring at his reflection in the viewport. The stars streaked past like ghosts, and he thought of his father's voice, not the words, just the sound, the rhythm of hatred, the echo of something that never left him. It was still there, even after death, even after victory. That was when he understood the truth the war had been trying to teach him. He didn't fight because he wanted to live. He fought because he didn't know what else to do with the rage. He carried it like a wound that would never close. And the galaxy, endless, ancient, and cruel, had given him a place to pour it. The Sith called it strength. The Jedi called it darkness. But to Dessel, it was simply survival. As the ship descended through the red haze of Korriban's atmosphere, he felt it again, that strange pull, that hum under his skin. The same feeling that had guided his hands on Phaseera. The same energy that had whispered through every moment of violence. Only now, it wasn't whispering, it was calling. And for the first time, Dessel answered. The mines had taught him pain. The war had taught him control. Korriban would teach him truth, and the galaxy would learn his name. Not Dessel, not soldier, not butcher, but something older, something inevitable, something Sith. Korriban didn't welcome visitors, it swallowed them. As the shuttle pierced the red sky, Dessel felt the change before the descent was complete. The Force shifted not with movement, but with memory, ancient, cold, angry. The surface was stone and sand, cut by jagged ridges and crumbling ruins. Winds howled with a voice that didn't belong to any living thing. The planet didn't feel dead. It felt buried alive. They said it was the birthplace of the Sith, a graveyard of kings and monsters. But to Dessel, it felt familiar, not like home but like a wound that hadn't closed. The ship landed near the base of the Sith Academy, a ziggurat of stone, obsidian black against the dust. Carvings stretched up its sides, faces screaming in silence, symbols worn by time. There were no guards, no welcome. Only a man in red robes. Lord Cordis. He didn't ask Dessel's name. He already knew it, but he didn't say it. Instead, he looked him over slowly and spoke one word. Bane. It wasn't a question. It was a sentence. Dessel didn't respond. He didn't need to. The name fit like iron. Heavy, final. Your past is gone, Cordis said. Your pain, your victories, none of it matters here. There is only the Force, and what you will become through it. Dessel now, Bane nodded once. No questions, no hesitation. The academy was colder inside. The walls hummed faintly, like they remembered screams. The halls were wide, dim, lined with statues that watched without eyes. There were other students. Some wore military insignias. Others had the look of fallen Jedi, quiet, precise, haunted. A few turned to stare as Bane passed, some in amusement, others in challenge. He ignored them all. He was led to his chamber, a stone cell with a slab for a bed, a basin, and nothing else. No mirrors, no windows, just the sound of breathing that wasn't always his. The first day brought no orientation, no speeches, no ceremony. Just orders. Classes on the code of the Sith, combat drills with vibroblades, meditation beneath the carved skulls of extinct beasts. Every lesson carried pain, not just physical, but internal, meant to break you. And if you broke, you disappeared. No one asked where the failures went. No one cared. Bane didn't speak to the others. Not yet. He listened. He watched. He saw how students flattered the instructors, how some sabotaged one another's gear before combat trials. He saw the duels, how hesitation meant death, even in practice. The instructors, all lords of the Sith, did nothing to stop it. This was the way, and Bane accepted it. But he didn't play their game. While others schemed for power, Bane trained alone, studied late, repeated his drills until the skin on his hands split open. He read ancient texts in Basic and Sith, piecing together meaning not from lectures, but from instinct. He could feel the truth behind the words. He didn't just learn the code. He understood it. Peace was a lie. Strength was truth. Through passion, he found clarity. Through pain, focus. It wasn't faith. It was memory. Every strike from his father, every scream from Phaseera, every night spent in silence. He didn't need to be convinced. He had lived the Sith path before he ever knew its name. And now, with that name behind him, Bane walked deeper into the shadows. Not to escape the past, but to sharpen it into a weapon. The first time Bane was betrayed, it didn't surprise him. It happened during a blade trial, one of the many combat tests arranged by the instructors to thin the ranks. Paired against a student named Phaseera, Bane had outmatched him quickly, disarming him with clean precision. But as Bane turned to face the instructor, another blade came for his spine. Phaseera had drawn a hidden dagger. The rule was clear. The fight ended when the instructor said so. Anything more was forbidden. But Cordis didn't punish him. He smiled. "Always strike when your enemy thinks you've shown mercy," the Lord said calmly. "That's when they're weakest." Bane didn't argue. He only nodded. But that night, Phaseera's bed was empty, and no one asked where he went. That was the first lesson. Not about strength, but about trust. There was none. In the mines, you learned to survive in silence. In war, you learned to survive through force. But here, on Korriban, survival came through understanding one thing above all. Everyone wants you gone. The students smiled during lessons, but behind those smiles were calculations. Alliances shifted by the hour. Some flirted, some flattered. Others spread rumors to sabotage each other before rankings were posted. Bane saw through all of it. He didn't make friends. He made distance. And they noticed. One night, a student laced his water with a toxin just enough to dull his reflexes during a sparring exam. Bane still won. He didn't report the act. He didn't retaliate. He waited. 3 days later, the student tripped while crossing a bridge above the training gorge. His scream echoed once, then stopped. No one questioned it. The instructors claimed to reward strength, but what they truly rewarded was cunning. Those who asked too many questions vanished. Those who begged for fairness were ignored. This was not a school. It was a crucible. The lessons weren't written on datapads. They were written in bruises, whispers, broken bones, and silent disappearances. Bane kept rising, not because he played their game better, but because he refused to play it at all. And that unsettled them. The instructors began to test him, pushing harder, isolating him, forcing him into increasingly brutal confrontations. They feared him, not for his skill, but for his silence. In lectures, Bane asked questions others avoided. He challenged logic, questioned tradition. When one instructor mocked him for citing an older Sith text, Bane quoted 3 passages back verbatim and pointed out the contradiction. The room went quiet. Later, the instructor reassigned him to sanitation duty for a week, a punishment meant to humiliate. Bane took it without complaint, but every night he studied, alone, beneath the shadows of ancient statues. The library was vast, but not all the knowledge was sanctioned. And Bane had begun to notice gaps. In the curriculum, in the code, in the way the Lord spoke of the Sith Brotherhood as if it was the final evolution of the Order, as if power should be shared, balanced. Bane didn't believe in balance. He believed in dominance. Not because he wanted to rule, but because he saw what happened when no one did. The Brotherhood spoke of unity, but in practice it was weakness masked as cooperation. Dozens of lords, dozens of voices, all equal, all diluted. There was no fear, no singular will. And Bane began to wonder if the Sith had forgotten what it meant to be Sith at all. The questions stayed quiet for now, but in the stillness of his mind, a decision had already begun to form. He would rise, not through tricks, not through alliances, but through the one path none of them could control: truth. And the truth was buried deeper than anyone dared go. The tombs called to him long before he entered them. Every night, the wind from the valley carried whispers through the corridors of the academy. They didn't sound like language, more like echoes folded through time. The others heard nothing, but Bane did. Always faint, always near the edge of thought. The instructors warned the students to stay out of the valley after dark. They said the ancient spirits of the Sith Lords lingered there, jealous of the living, feeding on fear. But to Bane, fear was no stranger. He had lived with it all his life. So, one night, he followed the sound. The path wound through red canyons and dunes that glowed under the twin moons. Carvings marked the way, ancient symbols older than the Republic, their meaning half lost even to the lords who ruled now. At the end of the trail, a massive stone door stood buried in shadow, half open, waiting. Inside lay the tomb of Freedon Nad. Bane didn't come seeking treasure or favor. He came for answers. The air inside was heavy, thick with dust and power. The walls were carved with scenes of war, armies burning, Jedi kneeling, entire planets falling to darkness. The deeper he went, the colder it became. His breath turned to mist. At the heart of the tomb, a sarcophagus rested beneath a cracked ceiling. Around it, the air shimmered not with heat, but with the pulse of the dark side. He knelt beside it, not in reverence, in recognition. This was what the Brotherhood had forgotten. Not unity, not order, fear, the kind that commanded galaxies, the kind that made men obey without question. As he reached out, the whispers grew louder. They weren't words, they were thoughts, memories, lessons carved into eternity. And then, a voice. Low, cold, ancient. Power does not share itself. He froze. The sound wasn't external. It was inside him, vibrating through his bones. He tried to speak, but no sound came. The voice continued. The Brotherhood is a lie, a circle of weakness. True strength demands sacrifice of others and of the self. The vision struck like lightning. Images flooded his mind. Darth Revan, cloaked in shadow, standing over fallen Jedi. Darth Malak, igniting his saber against his master. Darth Ruin, tearing apart his own army when they refused his command. Each one rising, falling, replaced. And beneath them all, one rule, one truth. There is no equality in power. The lesson seared itself into his memory. The dark side was not meant to be shared. It was meant to be claimed. When the vision ended, Bane found himself kneeling in silence, the tomb dim except for the faint crimson glow of the carvings. His heart pounded, his skin cold with sweat. He didn't know if what he heard was real or if the Force itself had spoken. But when he rose, he knew what he had to do. He walked back to the academy before dawn. No one saw him. No one noticed the shift in his eyes, the quiet clarity, the absence of doubt. From that day on, he trained differently, harder, deeper. The instructors saw it, but they didn't understand it. They thought ambition had taken him. They were wrong. Something older had. And though he said nothing, the whispers didn't stop. They grew clearer. They didn't promise glory. They didn't promise peace. They promised purpose. And Bane listened. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving. He was being chosen. The power that woke in him did not stay quiet. It burned beneath his skin, a storm trapped inside bone. Every lesson, every duel, every breath drew on that current. The instructors noticed. So did the other students. Some watched with fear, others with envy. And envy, on Korriban, always led to blood. They called him the Miner, whispered that his strength came from luck, not the Force, that his hands were too crude, his past too low to touch greatness. Bane ignored them, but the Force didn't. It fed on their hatred, and his silence became its weapon. When he trained, the air around him crackled. The practice droids he faced shattered under his strikes. During meditation, the torches flickered, bending toward him as if the dark itself were drawn to his breath. The instructors claimed it was potential, but potential meant nothing without control. And that was where they failed him. The Brotherhood wanted obedience, structure, shared power through shared restraint, but Bane's strength refused to be shared. The more they tried to contain it, the more violent it became. During one sparring session, he crushed an opponent's throat with the Force, not out of rage, out of instinct. They called it murder. Cordus called it excess. Bane called it clarity. Punishment followed, of course. Weeks of isolation in the catacombs beneath the academy, a test meant to break his spirit. But solitude was no punishment. Solitude was truth. Down there, among the bones of ancient lords, the voices returned. They didn't whisper this time. They commanded. Power does not bow. Power consumes. He didn't sleep, didn't eat. He trained until the Force tore through his veins like fire. And in that agony, he understood. The Sith he served were pretenders. They called themselves lords, yet they feared one another. They shared strength to avoid destruction, and in doing so, became weak. When they released him, he was different, gaunt, quiet, his eyes darker, his aura colder. The instructors didn't recognize it for what it was. They mistook endurance for loyalty. They would regret it. In class, Bane began to challenge every doctrine. He spoke of the old ways of Darth Revan's rule through power, of the ancient empires where one master commanded legions by fear alone. His peers dismissed him. Cordis warned him. But another lord listened. Copex, the same man who had brought him from Phaseera. He watched Bane's defiance with interest, and one night, after a lecture, he spoke privately. "You've seen the truth," Copex said. "Khan's Brotherhood is rot dressed as unity. They believe in peace among Sith, but peace is a lie." Bane said nothing. He didn't need to. Copex's eyes narrowed. "Be careful. The Dark Lord tolerates no rivals. Speak too loudly, and you will vanish." Bane almost smiled. "Then I will speak through strength." The Lord said nothing more, but the faintest look of approval crossed his face. After that, the academy grew colder, the air heavier. The students avoided him. Some still tried to provoke him to prove themselves against the minor. None succeeded. He no longer fought with anger. He fought with inevitability. Each motion calculated, each strike final. And when he stood alone among the ruins after each duel, he began to see what the tombs had shown him all along. There was no brotherhood, no equality, no shared throne. There could only be one. The rest were noise, distractions. He no longer feared them. He no longer feared anything. He was not their student anymore. He was their lesson. And soon, the galaxy would remember it. The miner had died on Apatros. The soldier had fallen on Phaseera. Now only one name remained: Bane. The war should have been over. The Sith had numbers, territory, fear on their side. They had worlds crumbling under their rule. They had Jedi falling by the hundreds. But Bane saw it clearly. They had already lost. Because they had no Dark Lord. They had dozens. Lord Khan stood at the center of it all, charismatic, powerful, loved by his followers. He wore the title of Dark Lord, not by legacy, but by consensus. He called the Brotherhood of Darkness a revolution, an evolution of the old ways. But Bane knew better. Equality among Sith was not balance. It was betrayal. There could be no brotherhood in darkness, only dominion. And so, while Khan rallied the Sith Lords under banners of shared strength, Bane remained silent, watching. They moved toward Ruusan, a shattered world of forests burned black and skies stained by orbital fire. The Jedi had fortified the planet, hoping to make a final stand. Khan promised unity, promised destiny. He gathered the full might of the Brotherhood and prepared to crush the Jedi in one decisive assault. He called it the Last War. Bane called it a grave. He had confronted Khan before, not with a blade but with truth. He spoke of Revan, of ruin, of the ancient rule of one, the idea that only a single will could command the dark side without dilution. But Khan dismissed him, said he was lost in the past. That Bane's path would doom them all. That was when Bane left. Not in anger, in clarity. He disappeared from the Brotherhood's ranks, retreating into forgotten libraries on Prakith and Leon. He studied holocrons, sealed in temples no longer marked on star charts. And there, he found the ritual. The thought bomb, a weapon created by the ancient Sith Lord Belia Darzu, refined later by Khan's own teachers and buried in fear. A sphere of compressed energy that, once detonated, would consume the minds of every force sensitive within its radius, Jedi and Sith alike. It wouldn't burn their flesh. It would trap their consciousness forever, screaming in a void of frozen time. A prison. An end. It was perfect. Not because it was powerful, but because it was final. The Brotherhood's weakness was in its survival. As long as they remained, their failure would continue. Only through death could the Sith be reborn. Bane returned to Ruusan alone. Khan welcomed him back like a lost brother, smiling, forgiving. He didn't ask where Bane had gone, and Bane didn't tell him. Instead, he offered a gift, a strategy, a ritual, one so powerful, it would end the Jedi threat forever. Khan, desperate and drowning in doubt, listened and believed. The Lords debated it for hours. Some doubted, others feared, but none dared speak too loudly against Khan. In the end, the Brotherhood agreed. They would gather in the caves beneath the Valley of the Jedi where the Force pulsed strongest and unleash the thought bomb in a single, glorious final act. They thought it would grant them victory. Bane knew it would grant them extinction. The Jedi had no idea what was coming. They prepared for a final confrontation, but what awaited them was not a duel, not a battle. It was a sacrifice. Bane did not enter the cave. He watched from above as the Brotherhood descended into darkness. Khan led them, robes billowing, eyes bright with faith. The others followed in silence. There was no laughter, no chanting, only resignation. And once they were gone, Bane turned away. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The Sith were about to die, and he was about to live. The Brotherhood gathered in darkness. Inside the caves beneath Ruusan's shattered surface, the Lord stood in a perfect circle, robes drawn tight, eyes closed. They spoke in unison, whispering syllables older than any known tongue. Each word carved through the Force like a blade. Above them, the war still raged. The Jedi had launched a counteroffensive. Thousands of soldiers poured into the valley, pushing back the Sith forces who remained topside. Blaster fire cracked through the ruins. Smoke bloomed from charred wreckage. But none of it mattered, because the true battle had already begun. Not in the sky, not in the trenches, but in the Force, and in the mind. Bane stood at the edge of the cliffs overlooking the valley, cloaked in shadow. His presence masked, his signature buried. He watched it all unfold like an executioner observing a prisoner's final breath. He didn't feel joy. He didn't feel guilt. He felt release. Below, Lord Khan led the ritual. His voice rose in pitch, trembling with power and fear. The sphere of energy forming between the Lords pulsed with growing light, not pure, but warped, sickly. It throbbed with hunger. The thought bomb was no weapon of precision. It was chaos made manifest. Bane had warned them, had begged them to abandon their illusion of unity, to accept that only a single Sith Lord must exist, one mind, one will. But they had refused. They called him a fanatic, a traitor. Now, they were about to become ash. Not in body, but in spirit. The Jedi had followed the Sith into the caves, led by General Hoth, proud, noble, and blind to what waited below. He believed he could reason with Khan, believed there was still hope for peace. There wasn't. By the time Hoth stepped into the chamber, the ritual was already beyond stopping. The energy sphere had grown, pulsating with every breath, every heartbeat in the room. It didn't feed on the Force. It was the Force twisted into a weapon with no conscience. Hoth saw it too late. And then, the world changed. The thought bomb detonated. It made no sound, no flame, just silence. And then, nothing. Bane felt the wave ripple through the Force, a vacuum pulling in everything that once lived, once thought, once reached for power. Sith Lords, Jedi Masters, warriors, students. Every mind caught in the blast was stripped of form, frozen in eternal suspension, trapped forever. Their bodies collapsed where they stood, eyes empty, skin pale. It was not death. It was worse. The Valley of the Jedi became a grave not of corpses, but of souls. And above it all, Bane stood alone. There was no laughter, no satisfaction, only purpose. The Sith were dead. The Jedi crippled. The war was over. And Bane, once desul, once miner, once soldier, had become the last. It hadn't been vengeance. It hadn't even been hate. It had been correction. The Brotherhood of Darkness had betrayed the very code they claimed to uphold. By sharing power, they had drained it. By working together, they had dissolved into noise. But now, there was silence. And in that silence, something new could grow. The rule of two. One master, one apprentice. No council, no infighting, no alliances. Only strength, passed down through fire, proven by betrayal. Not peace, not justice. Survival. As the wind swept across the valley floor, Bane descended into the cave slowly, deliberately. He stepped over the bodies of Sith and Jedi alike, eyes scanning the silence. He could still feel their presence, voices screaming beneath the surface of reality. They would never escape. But he had. And now, he needed a student. Not a follower, not a servant. An heir. Someone strong enough to kill him one day. Because that was the only way the Sith could remain strong. Through death, through succession, through truth. He walked deeper into the dark, the weight of extinction behind him, and the future beneath his feet. The light from the thought bomb still lingered. Not real light, not fire or flame, but an echo that pulsed through the Force. It illuminated nothing, yet burned everything it touched. Even from the surface, Bane could feel it clawing at the edges of his mind, hungry, endless, eternal. He descended further into the ruins, his boots crunching against the ash that had once been stone. The air was thick, charged with residue that made his skin sting. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became, until even the sound of his breath felt intrusive. At the center of the cavern, the ritual's aftermath glowed faintly, a sphere of distorted air, suspended in silence. Inside it, shadows moved like trapped memories. The thought bomb had done its work. Every Sith Lord of the Brotherhood, every Jedi who followed them in, all gone. Their consciousnesses trapped together in that sphere, locked in an endless storm of pain and confusion. It was said that within the bomb, time didn't pass. Seconds stretched into eternities. Each soul forced to relive its final moment forever. Anger, fear, betrayal frozen in a loop with no end. It was the perfect punishment. And the perfect beginning. Bane walked around it slowly, studying the swirling energy. He felt their presence, Khan's voice screaming, Hoth's light fading, hundreds of others merging into chaos. They deserved it. Khan for his weakness, the Lords for their vanity, the Jedi for their arrogance. All of them had believed themselves righteous. All of them had believed their way would bring order. But none had understood the truth. The Force didn't serve balance. It demanded dominance. And dominance required solitude. Bane knelt beside the sphere, closing his eyes. The whispers reached for him, desperate, pleading, promising. The spirits begged for release, some swearing loyalty, others offering secrets, power, absolution. He ignored them. They had chosen this. They had believed in equality, in mercy. and mercy had devoured them. He stood, letting the Force wash through him. What remained of Ruusan was death and silence, exactly as it needed to be. But not all was finished. Bane knew the Jedi would return. They would sense the wound in the Force, the unnatural stillness. They would come to bury the fallen, to mourn the dead, to misunderstand what had truly happened here. They would believe the Sith were gone, and that belief would be their greatest mistake. Because the Sith were not gone, they were reborn. Through him, through the lesson carved into his flesh and mind. The dark side was not a collective, it was a single flame, and every hand that touched it burned until only one remained. He had learned it on Apatros, under his father's fist, on Phaseera, through the screams of dying men, on Korriban, among liars who called themselves masters. Pain had been his teacher. Loss had been his ally. Now the galaxy itself would be his classroom. He reached into his cloak and withdrew a small holocron, one of the ancient relics he had taken before the war. Its crimson facets pulsed faintly as he poured his will into it. The ghostly figure of a long-dead Sith Lord flickered to life. Belia Darzu. Her voice was distant, her tone cold. "You've done what no other dared. You've ended the Brotherhood." "I've ended weakness," Bane answered. "Then you are Sith," the holocron whispered, "and you are alone." The projection vanished. Bane closed the holocron, the faint hum fading into silence. The sphere before him continued to swirl, a monument to failure and rebirth. He didn't destroy it. He left it untouched. A warning to any who would come after. The Jedi would one day find it and think it victory. But Bane knew better. He turned from the cavern, his cloak brushing against the cold stone. Above him, the night waited empty, endless, and free. The Sith had died in darkness, but from their ashes one would rise, and his shadow would outlast them all. Ruusan was silent. The wind carried the ashes of the fallen across valleys where nothing lived anymore. The ground still trembled faintly, as if the planet itself remembered the screams trapped beneath its surface. In that emptiness, one figure moved slow, deliberate, untouched by time. Bane, the last Sith. He walked among the wreckage, past the remains of war machines half buried in dirt, past the twisted armor of soldiers who had died for names already forgotten. Every step felt heavier than the last. The air itself resisted him, thick with the echo of power released too violently to fade. But he was alive. Not by chance, not by mercy, by design. He had survived because he understood. The Force rewarded purpose, not pity. It had spared him because he alone accepted what others denied, that power must belong to one, and one alone. He paused at the ridge above the valley and looked down. The entrance to the caves glowed faintly, still pulsing with the residue of the thought bomb. To most, it would look like a wound. To Bane, it looked like truth. The Jedi would arrive soon. They would sense the darkness here, feel the wound in the Force, and assume victory. They would not understand that this place was not the end of the Sith, it was their rebirth. The Order would mourn their dead. They would rebuild their temple. They would tell stories of how light triumphed over darkness once again. And while they did, the darkness would grow in silence. Within him, the war had stripped away everything that wasn't necessary: the pride of the Brotherhood, the arrogance of the Jedi, the noise of civilization. What remained was the core truth of existence: survival through strength. Bane turned away from the valley and began walking. He didn't know where his path would lead, but he knew what must come next. The rule of two was not an idea, it was a law. and laws meant nothing without someone to carry them. He needed an apprentice, someone to inherit his strength and one day destroy him for it. Someone who would ensure the Sith never decayed into councils and armies again. The apprentice would not be chosen through loyalty or affection, only potential, only the promise of power. For weeks, Bane traveled alone across the burned plains of Ruusan, scavenging food, water, and information from the few survivors who remained. Most were deserters, too afraid to fight, too broken to live. He ignored them. They were echoes of the old galaxy, the one he'd just buried. At night, he meditated beneath the open sky, the Force curling around him like a storm held at bay. He saw visions brief, flickering, uncertain. A child's face, a hand holding lightning, a voice whispering in defiance. He didn't know her name yet, but he would. The Force was showing him a thread thin, fragile, but alive. He followed it, through the jungles of Ambria, through the ruins of shattered camps, through the endless whispering of ghosts that still lingered from the thought bomb. The closer he drew to that thread, the louder the whispers became. They didn't threaten him. They warned him, pleaded with him. But he was beyond pity. He had seen what compassion created weakness. He had seen what mercy brought ruin. And so he walked through their cries untouched, their voices falling away behind him like dust. In the distance, a storm gathered over the horizon, lightning illuminating the world in sharp, violent flashes. He stopped for a moment, feeling the electricity hum through the air, and smiled faintly. It reminded him of power, of purpose, of what came next. He was not a lord, not a savior, not a ghost clinging to the past. He was evolution, and evolution demanded sacrifice. He looked once more toward the valley, toward the grave of the Brotherhood. There was no sorrow in his gaze, only conviction. The Sith had died as many, but they would rise as two. And through that balance of hatred and hunger, the galaxy would never be free of them again. The Sith had died on Ruusan, but not all death is loss. Some death is correction. Bane walked through the ashes of a broken order with no grief, no hesitation. The thought bomb had ended the Brotherhood, but it had not destroyed the Sith, not truly. The title remained, and with it the burden to redefine it. The Sith had failed, not from weakness of power, but weakness of structure. Too many lords, too many voices, each grasping, each hoarding, each unwilling to serve or fall. In their fear of being ruled, they became unworthy of ruling. That was the truth no one dared speak. But Bane had spoken it, and now he would make it law. One master, one apprentice. That was the path, that was the future, not because it was safe, but because it was necessary. One to embody power, one to crave it. Together, they would grow stronger, not in peace, but in conflict, in the forge of mistrust, in the promise of betrayal. Because the dark side thrived on fear, on competition, on hunger. Anything less was heresy. He didn't write it down. There was no codex, no monument. The rule of two wasn't declared. It was felt, a current in the Force, a new current surging through him. The galaxy thought the Sith were gone. Let them think it. They would speak of victory, of balance restored. They would lower their guard, and while they did, he would begin again. But this time, in shadows, no armies, no temples, no banners, just will. The will to survive, to learn, to pass on what mattered. It wouldn't be quick, The Jedi ruled the Republic now, their numbers strong, their grip firm. But Bane wasn't interested in today. He was planting a tree whose roots would spread beneath centuries, a poison too slow to notice. He knew his path would be lonely, but he wasn't afraid. He had never been afraid of silence. He had lived in it. Now, he would use it. But first, he needed an apprentice. Not a student, not a soldier. A rival. Someone who would one day try to kill him. Someone strong enough to succeed. The Jedi taught unity, peace, detachment, but that created weakness, dependence, fragility. The rule of two demanded the opposite, that power must be taken, not given. Only through betrayal would the Sith evolve. Because survival wasn't proof of strength. Victory was. That was the lesson, the legacy, the law. He wandered for weeks after Ruusan, searching, waiting, listening. He didn't look for potential in bloodlines, not in names or titles. He looked for instinct, for pain, for the raw edge of untamed will. He scoured worlds scarred by war, abandoned outposts, ruined settlements. He spoke to no one, used aliases, hid his presence in the Force like a dying ember beneath ash. He wasn't seeking someone who wanted power. He was seeking someone who needed it. Because that need, that desperation, was the beginning of all Sith. He remembered the cold halls of Apatros, the fist of his father, the silence after the first kill. That was where it began. Pain wasn't a barrier. It was the door. And only those who had walked through it could understand what must come next. Then, on Ambria, he felt something. A pull. It was faint, a tremor in the Force, subtle but deliberate. The world itself was broken, its surface scarred by ancient alchemical battles, its soil soaked with dark side energy that never truly faded. The people lived on the edge of madness. Many were sick, some were cursed. But in the middle of it all, Bane found her. A child. Small, silent, and deadly. She had killed to survive. Not out of fear but clarity. There was no guilt in her eyes. Only focus. She did not flinch when he approached. She did not run. He asked her name. She gave it. Rain. But names would change. As all things must. Because from this moment forward, the rule of two had begun. And the Sith were alive. Ambria was a wound that never healed. The planet's surface shimmered with the residue of ancient rituals, its air thick with the smell of iron and decay. What had once been a world of light had long ago become a scar of the dark side. The lakes glowed faintly at night, not from stars, but from corruption. It was there that Bane found her, a child sitting among corpses. The survivors whispered her name, Rain, a refugee from the war, one of many orphans abandoned after the final battles. But she was not like the others. She did not cry, she did not beg. She did not speak unless spoken to. And when men tried to take her food, they didn't live long enough to regret it. Bane watched her from a distance for 3 days. He saw no blaster, no weapon, just instinct. She moved with awareness far beyond her years, guided by something unseen. The Force surrounded her like a shroud, cold, heavy, and sharp. He approached her at dusk. The wind carried dust through the ruins as he stood before her. "You killed them," he said. She looked up. Her eyes were quiet. "They would have killed me." He nodded. "And you feel nothing?" She hesitated, then shook her head. That was the answer he wanted. Compassion was weakness. Survival was truth. He crouched beside her, studying the child's face. "You have strength," he said softly, "but strength without purpose is wasted. Do you want to learn what to do with it?" Her voice was small, but steady. Yes. That was enough. He told her to follow him. She did. No hesitation, no fear. In that moment, the rule of two took its first breath. Master and apprentice. It was not affection that bound them, it was necessity. Bane did not comfort her, he trained her. He broke her body and rebuilt her will. He taught her to meditate on pain, to feel it, to feed on it. He made her hold stones in the heat until her hands bled, forced her to focus the force through exhaustion until she collapsed. Each time she fell, he made her rise again. He showed her how the dark side lived in conflict, not anger alone, but purpose sharpened by suffering. The Jedi sought peace to escape pain. The Sith embraced it to transcend it. Rain learned quickly, too quickly. She listened to every word, studied every motion. Her power grew fast, too fast for her age. Bane saw it, but he did not fear it. That was the point. Every lesson he gave her was a test, every success a temptation. He needed her to crave more, because one day that craving would turn against him. That was how the Sith would remain pure. He didn't hide his intent. He told her plainly, "One day you will try to kill me. If you do not, I will have chosen wrongly." She didn't flinch, she only asked, "And if I win, then you will be stronger than I was." He smiled when she said nothing. The girl didn't understand it yet, but one day she would. In time, he gave her a new name, Zannah. Names had power, and Rain was a memory of weakness. Zannah was a promise. The two of them traveled across forgotten worlds. Bane taught her how to hide within the Force, how to cloak her presence so even Jedi Masters could pass by unaware. He taught her to read ancient Sith texts, to feel their meaning instead of memorizing their words. Each planet became a lesson. On Dixon, she learned survival. On Onderon, she learned fear. On Lehon, she learned patience. And slowly, she began to mirror him, calm, deliberate, silent. But beneath that calm, Bane could sense it. The hunger, it was growing. The galaxy had forgotten the Sith. The Jedi believed themselves safe. But somewhere, in the endless dark between stars, two shadows were moving. One to rule, and one to rise. History forgot them. While the Republic rebuilt, while the Jedi declared peace, while senators debated laws in shining chambers above Coruscant, the Sith were nowhere to be seen. Because they were not seen, they were watching. Bane and Zannah vanished into the outer systems, slipping between trade routes and forgotten moons. They did not gather armies. They did not claim worlds. They collected something more dangerous. Knowledge, the kind buried in crypts, hidden in dead languages, preserved only in whispers left behind by monsters. Bane understood what most Sith had ignored, that power was not flame. It was ice. It did not burn fast. It froze, deep and slow, until it claimed everything. They stayed on Tython for a season, buried in the ruins of Force temples built before the Jedi themselves. Zannah practiced meditation for days without speaking. On Thule, they unearthed a vault of Sith scrolls sealed for millennia. On Umbara, they hunted creatures drawn to Force sensitivity, not for sport, but to study how darkness twisted instinct. Every journey was a lesson, but not all lessons came from him. Zannah had begun to seek her own texts. She questioned his choices, questioned the old masters, whose names were etched into stone: Ajunta Pall, Marka Ragnos, Tulak Horde. She didn't worship them. She studied them, and then she challenged them. Bane watched with caution. He knew what it meant. Her power was no longer borrowed, it was becoming her own. That was good and dangerous, because the rule of two had no exceptions. The moment he sensed weakness in himself, she would be required to strike. The moment she proved unworthy, he would be required to replace her. It was not cruelty, it was law, and the law was above them both. Still, he prepared. His body, though hardened by the Force, was mortal. The dark side fed his strength but left behind a cost pain in the bones, blood that moved too slowly. He studied Sith alchemy, searching for methods to preserve life. He began construction of a holocron, a vault of knowledge meant to carry his legacy beyond death. Not because he feared it, but because the Sith could not vanish again. Not like before. Not like Korriban. Not like Ruusan. Zannah remained at his side, but her silence had shifted. It was no longer deference, it was calculation. She watched him when he thought she didn't. She lingered after sparring sessions, tested him in conversation. She was waiting, and that meant she understood. He took her to worlds steeped in sorrow, to places where the Jedi had left scars, not to mourn, to remember. The Jedi had forgotten what darkness could become. The Sith had not, and they would return. Not in numbers, not in banners, in blood. The rule of two demanded it. Two blades hidden beneath centuries, forged in silence, waiting for the galaxy to forget how it once bled. The Jedi hunted rumors, heard whispers, but each time they reached, the shadows faded. Because Bane had taught her well, and Zannah no longer needed him to tell her how to disappear. One day, she would need to do more than vanish. She would need to strike. And when that day came, she would not ask permission. She would take her place. Or she would die. There was no middle. And Bane would accept either outcome. Because in truth, he had already won. He had done what no Sith before him had managed. He had made death part of the plan. And in doing so, he had made the Sith immortal. The rule of two was not a philosophy. It was a blade. And like any blade, it demanded blood. Bane had crafted the future with his own hands. He had laid its foundation in war, built its walls with silence, and written its name in the minds of two alone. But the structure he created was not a fortress. It was a crucible. And now, he was inside it. Zannah had grown. Her power no longer flickered, it burned. She no longer waited for his commands. She chose her own studies, mastered her own forms. When they sparred, she struck first. When they meditated, he could feel her presence pressing against his, testing its edges like a lock waiting to break. She had learned the lesson. Not just that she could betray him, but that she must. One day, Bane felt his body faltering. The Force still obeyed him, but not as quickly. His pain lingered longer. The injuries from their missions, once forgotten overnight, now whispered through his bones. He never showed it. Not to her. But she knew. She had always known how to read silence. He began seeking immortality in earnest. Not through spirit, he rejected the cowardice of ghosts. He wanted life, continuity, the ability to guide the Sith for centuries, to shape them beyond one apprentice, one lifetime. He studied essence transfer, a ritual older than most holocrons dared record. The process was unnatural, not rebirth, but theft. One mind forced into another body, devouring it from within. It required will stronger than death itself. And even then, it was not guaranteed. But Bane feared only one thing, the rule failing. If Zannah proved unworthy, if she struck too early or hesitated too long, the chain would break. And everything he had built would vanish. So he prepared a final contingency. If she could not kill him, he would take her body and continue, not as her teacher, as her. But Zannah had already begun preparing as well. She studied sorcery, delved into Sith magics lost to even Bane's records. She trained her mind as much as her blade. Her strikes grew faster, her will more disciplined. Her words, when she spoke to him, no longer sought approval. They sought advantage. He watched it happen. He let it happen. Because this was the rule. Not just two Sith in hiding, but one line, one test. When the apprentice grew strong enough, the master had to fall. Otherwise, the master had failed. There was no pride in it, no sentiment, only clarity. Bane felt the moment approaching. He saw it in the way Zannah moved through the shadows, not as a follower, but as a rival. He saw it in the way she looked at his holocron, as if imagining her voice inside it one day. And he welcomed it. The rule had never been about survival. It had been about refinement. Power passed through pain, strength proven by succession. If he was unfit to hold his title, he deserved to lose it. That was the cost of the rule. Not death, obsolescence. He taught her everything not out of love but duty. He gave her the tools to destroy him, and she accepted them. Because she understood. To serve the Sith, she had to become the Sith. And to become the Sith, she had to bury the one who made her. She was 10 years old when the war ended. The world around her was ash. Ruusan had been stripped of life, scorched by the thought bomb's aftermath. The Jedi were gone, the Sith were gone. Only ghosts remained, whispering from the cracks in the caves. And one child. She had wandered through the carnage in silence, stepping over bodies that no longer bled, through smoke that never cleared. There was no fear in her, just motion, just breath. Bane saw her from a distance. At first, he thought she was a hallucination, the Force playing tricks after days without sleep. But the girl was real. Her movements too focused, her eyes too calm. He watched her kneel beside a Republic trooper's corpse and take a knife from the man's belt. Not in panic, not in need, with purpose. When another survivor, older, stronger, tried to steal her rations, she used that knife, once, quick, clean. And still, she didn't flinch. Bane stepped from the shadows. She didn't run. "What's your name?" he asked. She looked up. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "Rain." He crouched in front of her, not with softness, but with intent. "You're alone," he said. She nodded. "They left me." He tilted his head. "And yet you're still alive." "I'm not weak," she said. It was not defiance. It was fact. He studied her. The Force wrapped around her not with light, but with weight. He could feel it in the air, not raw power, but potential, untapped, undisciplined, waiting. Not a warrior, a seed. He said nothing more, only extended his hand. She took it, not as a plea, as a choice. And the rule of two began again. He didn't tell her what she was, not at first. He didn't speak of Sith, of legacy, of destiny. He only watched her, measured her, tested her. He let her walk beside him in silence, across the broken fields of Ruusan, through the wilderness beyond the valley. At night, they made camp among the ruins of crashed starfighters. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't ask who he was. And he took note of that. Curiosity came later. Hunger came first. When they reached a quiet corner of the Ambria system, Bane began her training. Not with sabers, not with lightning. With questions. What do you remember of the war? They fought, she said. They screamed. They died. Do you know who won? She looked at him. You did. He almost smiled. The girl didn't need answers. She needed truth. And truth had nothing to do with Jedi or Sith. It had to do with power. He began shaping her slowly, not just to kill, but to understand, to see beyond the moment, to feel how fear moved people, how silence could control a room. Rain listened too well. She didn't just memorize his lessons, she absorbed them. When he gave her a task, she completed it. When he left her alone for days, she didn't cry. She meditated. He once told her to find shelter in a storm without using the Force. She disappeared for 2 days. When he found her, she was curled inside a collapsed cargo pod, wrapped in the torn skin of a dead animal for warmth. No complaints, no words, only a stare that asked, "What's next?" He gave her a new name, Zannah, because Rain was a memory, and Zannah was a beginning. Bane did not teach her quickly. He taught her slowly, the way cliffs teach the sea. Zannah's training was not a series of lessons. It was erosion, pain applied with precision, silence used like a scalpel. He wasn't shaping her body, he was sculpting her will. And will could not be rushed. He gave her tasks that served no obvious purpose. She memorized ancient languages, translated texts with no clear relevance. She was forced to copy Sith runes until her fingers cramped. She was made to meditate in swamps where the insects didn't sleep and the nights never ended. He never praised her, never told her what she had done right, only what she hadn't yet done. She began to understand. This wasn't training, it was survival under control. And control was the lesson. He once asked her, "What's stronger, fear or pain?" She answered, "Pain." He struck her, once, hard. She didn't cry. Then he asked again, and she said, "Fear." He nodded, because pain ends, but fear remembers. That was the moment her thinking changed. She stopped asking what he wanted. She started asking why he asked. And that, Bane knew, was the beginning of intelligence. Zannah's Force sensitivity was different from his. She wasn't brute strength. She was precision. Her gift was not in destruction, but in deception. She could reach into another's mind and find its cracks, twist emotion, amplify fear, drown thought. He trained her to turn belief against itself. He taught her how to exploit compassion, to mimic weakness as a weapon. He said, "The Jedi protect the weak. That's their flaw. Show them a wound, and they'll hand you the blade." She remembered it, used it. One day, while traveling through a remote trade station, Zannah baited a Jedi Knight with nothing but a whisper. She limped into view, feigning terror. The Jedi hesitated just long enough. The scream that followed wasn't hers. The Knight didn't die, but he would never raise a blade again. When she returned, Bane didn't praise her. He simply said, "Now you understand." Her body grew stronger, but it was her mind that evolved. She stopped reacting. She began orchestrating. Every encounter became a game of control. Every silence was measured. She didn't fight to win. She fought to dominate. He made her build her own lightsaber without help. When the crystal resisted, she didn't curse. She meditated until it bent. When the hilt burned her, she rebuilt it. 3 times. The weapon she forged wasn't beautiful. It wasn't meant to be. It was lean, balanced, perfectly sized for her smaller frame. Bane watched her wield it. She moved like thought given form. Quiet, exact. The first time they dueled, she lost within seconds. The second time, she lasted a minute. The 5th time, she disarmed him. He took the blade back without a word. She didn't smile, because she knew. It wasn't about winning yet. It was about being ready. Every lesson had sharpened her not into a killer but into a question. When? That was what Bane saw in her eyes now. Not if. When? And he was still waiting for the answer. By the time Zannah reached adulthood, her power was no longer something she summoned. It was something she carried. She no longer followed, she observed. Every gesture, every silence from Bane became a new puzzle to dissect. He rarely explained himself anymore, and she no longer asked. She understood now that real knowledge wasn't spoken. It was implied. Bane pushed her deeper into the dark arts, Sith sorcery, thought manipulation, the rituals that bent flesh and shattered the line between illusion and reality. She resisted at first. The spells were chaotic, unpredictable. They twisted the mind as easily as they bent the force. "You fear what you might become," Bane said once, watching her hesitate over an ancient incantation. "That fear is proof you're close to something real." So she embraced it. Zannah learned to project pain into others, to make her enemies see what she wanted them to see, their worst memories, their deepest shame. It wasn't destruction, it was corruption. The mind broke long before the body did. And that was her gift. Still, her progress worried Bane. She grew stronger not through fury, but through calculation. He had taught her to channel passion, yet she seemed untouched by it. She didn't hate. She didn't rage. She understood, and that made her dangerous in ways even he hadn't expected. He tested her constantly, sent her alone on missions across the Outer Rim, assassinations, manipulations, quiet exterminations of those who might expose them. Each time, she returned unharmed, unchanged. She left no trail, no witnesses, only silence. When she spoke of her kills, there was no pride, just precision. Bane began to realize the dark side had shaped her differently. He had become a hammer, direct, relentless, powerful. She had become a whisper, soft, untraceable, inevitable. One night, she returned from Nal Hutta, carrying the severed crest of a Hutt clan that had dared to interfere with their plans. Bane asked how she had done it. "I convinced them to destroy themselves," she said. And he believed her. He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, felt the faintest ripple of doubt. Not in her loyalty, in his control. Zannah noticed the hesitation. She didn't speak of it, but she felt something shift between them. Her lessons changed after that. They trained less in combat and more in thought. Long silences replaced dialogue. They no longer sparred with blades, but with ideas. Each question was a trap, each answer a test. Bane would speak of Revan, of the old empires, of the balance between power and survival. Zannah would counter, questioning, dissecting, sometimes opposing him outright. He didn't punish her for it. He respected it. But inside, he wondered. Would she one day see him as a flaw to correct? The dark side demanded that she would. And perhaps that was what he wanted. Zannah had surpassed his expectations. She had mastered the tools of fear, the weight of deception, the patience of a true Sith. But with mastery came risk. Bane could no longer tell if he was teaching her, or if she was allowing him to believe he still was. And that was the moment he knew the rule of two was working. Because the apprentice was already becoming the master. He watched her more than he taught her now. Zannah didn't realize it, or maybe she did, but Bane had stopped training her in the traditional sense. Their lessons were rarer, their conversations shorter, but his attention had never been sharper. Because he wasn't guiding her anymore. He was measuring her. She moved through their life with quiet precision. She made plans before he gave orders. She completed tasks he hadn't assigned. She studied holocrons he'd left sealed not by accident, but by choice. Each time she acted without permission, he saw a piece of himself. Not the man from Rusan, not the miner, but the Sith. And that was the danger. He remembered what it felt like to look at your master and wonder if they had already peaked, to see the flaw, the hesitation, the doubt, and begin counting the hours. Zannah had begun counting. She never said it, she never needed to. But when she meditated, he could feel her thoughts bending around him. When she spoke, her tone lacked reverence. She no longer sought correction, only acknowledgement. And that was the final sign. She was ready. He, however, was not sure he was. Not because he feared death, but because something deep inside him whispered a question he hadn't expected. What if she fails? The rule of two allowed no mercy. If she struck too soon, she would die. If she hesitated too long, he would. He could not allow the line to break, so he considered other paths. Essence transfer, rituals that would allow his mind to move into a stronger body, even hers. He told himself it was preparation. That if she was not strong enough, he would take what he had given her and preserve the Sith through his own will. But he knew it was fear, not of her, of himself, that he had grown too comfortable as the master, that he might cling to power instead of passing it. He began speaking more about death, not as an end, but as a threshold, a necessity, a moment where truth was revealed. Zannah listened. She never challenged those speeches, because she already knew. She was studying his weakness like a surgeon watching for a faltering pulse, waiting not for an opening in combat, but for an opening in conviction. That was how she would strike, not with strength, with timing, and he would not stop her. He had spent years watching the galaxy forget them, watching the Jedi grow arrogant again, watching the Republic lull itself into the illusion of safety. None of them saw what was coming, but Bane did, because he had lived long enough to see the power of patience. And Zannah was patience made flesh. He watched her more closely than ever in those final years, not out of distrust, but out of hope. He wanted her to succeed, because if she didn't, everything he had done, everything he had burned would collapse into silence. And silence was not legacy. It was failure. So he waited, he trained, and he prepared, not just to be killed, to be replaced, because that was the rule. And the rule was greater than either of them. Power had saved him, from the mines, from the war, from death, but it could not save him from time. Bane had forged the rule of two from ash and blood, torn down a broken brotherhood, and planted a new order in secret. And yet, late at night, he could still feel it, that silent ache in his bones. The tremor in his hand after a duel, the hesitation behind his thoughts. Time had begun to whisper to him. It did not scream, it did not strike. It waited, patient, certain. That was what terrified him most. He did not fear dying in battle. He feared dying forgotten. If he fell before Zannah was strong enough to replace him, the line would break. His legacy would fade. The Sith would vanish again into myth, and all he had built would mean nothing. He had spent his life building something larger than himself. But now, in the silence, he began to wonder, what if it wasn't enough? What if his death was just death? So he searched. The Sith archives were not just weapons, they were memories, and in those decaying records, buried beneath centuries of rage and ruin, Bane found a pattern, a recurring obsession among the oldest lords. Immortality. Not metaphorical survival, real survival. To live past death, not as a ghost, not as a name, but in body, in mind, in will. The ancient Sith had tried, Darth and Dedu, Darth Nihilus, Sorcerer's Sin. Each had reached toward eternity, and each had failed or vanished. But their writings remained. Bane devoured them. He studied holocrons so unstable that just opening them caused headaches and bleeding noses. He reconstructed half-burned parchments with the Force alone. He meditated for days beside tombs that echoed with voices no living being should hear. And as he read, the fear inside him began to focus. It no longer paralyzed him, it drove him. He would not simply wait for Zannah to grow strong. He would become immortal and watch her become strong. And if she failed, if she never struck, he would take her body for himself. That was the promise of essence transfer, a ritual so dangerous even the ancients had feared it. To rip one's own spirit from their decaying shell and force it into another vessel, bending it, fusing it, destroying its former soul. A second chance, a continuation. It was perfect, but it demanded everything. Preparation, pain, and time. He told Zannah none of this. She sensed something shifting, but she said nothing. She thought he was aging, slowing, weakening, and that illusion was useful. Because Bane needed her calm. He couldn't risk her striking too early. Not yet. Not while the ritual was incomplete. He began isolating himself more, traveling to worlds with dark reputations, Tython, Prakith, Ambria, searching for pieces lost to the galaxy, tombs sealed in time. Some were traps, some were empty, but some whispered back. He found a fragment of Darth and Dedu's mind, sealed inside an ancient holocron, alive in a way that defied logic. The spirit mocked him, warned him, threatened to consume him. But Bane endured, because he saw now what the others hadn't. Immortality wasn't a prize, it was a test. You had to want it more than breath, more than sanity, more than the truth. And Bane did. He told himself it was for the Sith, for the rule, for Zannah. But deep down, beneath all the logic, he knew the truth. He didn't want to be replaced. He didn't want to disappear. He didn't want to die. And in the dark, as he knelt before relics soaked in screams, that fear gave him strength. Not weakness, will. The first sign was pain. It began as something small, a stiffness in his joints, a dull ache behind his ribs. He ignored it at first, assuming it was fatigue. But as months turned into years, the ache spread. His skin grew pale, his muscles tightened. When he used the Force, his veins burned. Bane tried to hide it, but Zannah noticed. She watched his movements during training, the way he shifted weight from one leg to another, the pauses that didn't exist before, the tremor that touched his fingers when he thought she wasn't looking. She said nothing, but her silence said everything. The body that once carried the power of the dark side like lightning was decaying. The energy he had once commanded so effortlessly now resisted him. Each act of strength came with a price. But Bane was not ready to yield. He reinforced his body with the Force, strengthened his bones, slowed his heart, kept his blood moving when nature wanted it still. It worked for a while, until it didn't. The dark side was not mercy. It gave freely but demanded return. And every moment he forced his body to obey, it took something in exchange. Sleep, hunger, sanity. His reflection became unrecognizable. The flesh beneath his armor turned mottled and gray, like metal left to corrode. His eyes glowed brighter, not from health, but from imbalance. Zannah saw it, and so did he. Still, he pressed on. His search for immortality grew desperate. He returned to Darth Dedu's tomb on Prakith, searching for the fragments he had failed to claim before. The holocron resisted him. The spirit within demanded reverence. Bane gave none. He broke it open with the Force, tearing the relic apart, consuming its essence until the ancient Lord screamed in silence. The knowledge poured into him like fire. He saw flashes the process of transferring life. The ritual markings, the agony of separation. He learned that immortality wasn't conquest, it was infection. And to succeed, he would need a perfect vessel. Someone strong enough to survive possession, but not strong enough to resist it. He thought of Zannah, and the fear returned, because she was strong enough, perhaps too strong. Every night, he meditated, wrestling the thought like an intruder in his mind. Each whisper from the dark side seemed to mock him. You taught her too well. He tried to shut them out, but the truth persisted. His teachings had forged her into the one thing he could not defeat, his replacement. And yet, without her, the Sith would die. It was an irony only the dark side could create. Bane began to isolate himself completely, retreating into hidden chambers on Umbria. His armor fused to his skin from neglect. His flesh beneath it began to rot. He used Sith alchemy to preserve what remained. The rituals numbed the pain but amplified the decay. The Force could no longer heal him. It only delayed the inevitable. When he looked at his reflection now, he saw not a man, but an artifact, a relic animated by will alone. And that realization haunted him more than the pain. Because relics were made to be replaced, he refused to let that happen. He would outlast his flesh, outlast her, outlast death. He began preparing the ritual of essence transfer. Every stroke of its design carved into his mind, every syllable memorized through agony. But the process demanded perfection. A single misstep would scatter his soul into nothingness. He practiced in silence, and with every breath his body failed him a little more. The irony was cruel. To escape mortality, he first had to embrace decay. And as the last fragments of his strength began to fade, Bane whispered a truth that even he hated to admit. Power was never meant to last, but he would try anyway. Because to a Sith, trying was surviving, and surviving was everything. The deeper he sank into the rituals, the more the silence began to change. At first, it was still, a vast, empty quiet where he could hear only the rhythm of his own breath. But soon, that quiet began to whisper. It came at the edges of meditation. A name murmured in an unfamiliar tongue, a fragment of laughter that wasn't his, a chorus of voices without mouths. They spoke from places even the dark side feared. He told himself they were echoes of the tombs, residual energies left behind by centuries of death. But the longer he listened, the clearer they became. They called him Lord, they called him heir, and they called him fool. He recognized some of the voices: Darth Revan, Darth Andedu, perhaps even Marka Ragnos, or perhaps not. The mind, under enough strain, could make any phantom sound real. But he could feel them. They pressed against the walls of his thoughts, like the weight of an ocean against glass. Your body fails, one whispered. Your will cracks. You reach too high, another mocked. You will fall like the rest. Sometimes they argued among themselves. Sometimes they sang. Other times, they went quiet, so quiet that the silence itself seemed alive. He would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding against armor that no longer fit. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. He stopped trusting the sound of his own mind. And yet, he kept listening. Because hidden in the noise were pieces of truth, fragments of power. He learned that the ritual of essence transfer was not just a spell, it was a war of identity, a duel of existence. When the soul left the body, it had only moments to conquer its new host. If it hesitated, it was lost forever, consumed by the void. Failure meant not death, but oblivion. No pain, no memory, nothing. He wrote the ritual over and over again in his mind, refining every syllable until he could speak it without breath. He meditated on his heartbeat until it slowed almost to stillness. He began seeing flashes of the other side shapes forming in the void, pale faces watching him from beyond the veil of life. They were not welcoming. They were waiting. And he understood why. The Sith who came before him had not failed by lack of knowledge. They had failed because they hesitated, because they doubted, because even monsters fear what they cannot control. Bane would not. He would become the first to finish what the ancients had started. But the whispers never stopped. They taunted him. They said Zannah had already chosen her moment, that she was stronger than he realized, that she would strike before he was ready. They said his ritual was flawed, that he had misread the texts, that the soul could not be transferred, only scattered. He ignored them, because he knew fear was their weapon, and fear was his. Still, the voices followed him, even when awake, even when he stood beneath Ambria's fractured sky. Once, while meditating near the lake that shimmered with trapped spirits, he thought he saw a figure in the water, a reflection that wasn't his own. A face both younger and older, eyes burning gold. He reached toward it, and the lake rippled, whispering words that made the air colder. "There is no escape from death," he whispered back. "Then I will become it." The wind fell silent, the lake stilled. And for the first time, the voices stopped. Only then did he realize the truth he had ignored. The void wasn't just answering him. It was listening. The ritual chamber was silent. No light entered from the world outside. The air hung still, thick with dust and the scent of ancient oils. Carved into the stone beneath him were markings older than the Republic. Bane stood at the center, alone. He had gathered every fragment, every word, every echo from the dead. The ritual of essence transfer was complete. His body was failing, his mind was sharpened to a blade. But his will was not steady. Something had changed. Zannah, she had grown, not just in strength, but in conviction. Her footsteps were no longer cautious, her gaze no longer uncertain. She had begun to ask questions he did not answer. She had begun to watch him the way a predator watches wounded prey. He could feel her preparing, and part of him welcomed it, because this was how it was meant to be. The rule of two was not sustained by peace. It was built on blood, a cycle of teaching and betrayal, strength and death. He had created the system, and now it was turning on him. Zannah had the power, but did she have the will? The Force would decide. He did not fear death. He feared failure. If she could not kill him, she was not worthy to continue the Sith. If he could not possess her, his legacy would die. It was perfect, terrifying, and final. The battle, when it came, shattered the quiet. Zannah confronted him beneath the black sky of Ambria. The storm above them screamed. The ground shook as the two Sith clashed. Lightning met shadow. Thought met rage. Every lesson he had given her she used against him. Every technique he had once dominated her with, she twisted. She had become not just his student, but his mirror. And mirrors cut both ways. Their duel lasted longer than any he had fought, not because of her power, but because of his limits. His body slowed. His strikes weakened. The pain beneath his armor screamed with every movement. She began to win. But he had prepared for this. He let go of the physical and reached for the ritual. His voice, broken and deep, began the incantation. His hands formed symbols in the air. The Force twisted around him, thick and unnatural. Zannah screamed as the darkness reached for her. It was not an attack. It was invasion. He was no longer fighting her. He was entering her. The ritual tore his soul from his flesh. It ripped his consciousness from decay and hurled it toward hers. She resisted. The chamber trembled. Two minds collided inside one body. For moments, there was no time, no place, only will. His voice whispered in her thoughts. His presence clawed at her identity. He showed her visions of eternity, of power, of what the Sith could become if he continued. She screamed back with her own truth, her own fear, her own strength. And in the space between them, something broke. Bane felt himself slipping, not destroyed, not erased, but pushed down, buried beneath her. The void, always waiting, opened beneath him. He fought to climb back, but her mind was stronger, more precise, more ruthless. His voice faded, his thoughts dissolved, and then there was only silence. Zannah opened her eyes. The storm had stopped. The wind had died. The ritual was complete. She stood alone in the chamber, the markings around her still glowing faintly. Her hands trembled, but only for a moment. She whispered a name, not his, hers, and she walked away. In the air behind her, the last trace of his presence flickered. Some say it was a shadow. Others say it was nothing. But deep within her mind, a voice would sometimes echo, low, distant, waiting. The Jedi believed it was over. The war that had scorched the stars, that had drawn blood from every corner of the galaxy, had ended in silence. The Brotherhood of Darkness was gone. The Sith were gone. and peace had returned. But not all peace is real. Beneath the quiet, something old began to stir. It wasn't an army, it wasn't a rebellion, it was something worse. A presence. The Force began to whisper again. Not in words, but in weight, a slow pull toward dread, like standing in the dark with your back to something ancient and breathing. Jedi masters meditating in the temples of Coruscant felt it first. Then seers on Dantooine, then children, sensitive, frightened. Something was watching. Something had survived. But there was no name, no face, no movement. Just a silence that was too perfect. The Jedi did not understand. But Bane did. He had made the galaxy forget. He had erased the Sith from the surface of history and buried them deep inside the future. His rule was not of planets, but of patience. No banners, no marches, just one voice, one will. And one apprentice, still growing, still watching. While Zannah studied, Bane waited. And as decades passed, he felt the Jedi beginning to search. They were too late, but they were coming. One night, the Force trembled. Not in warning, in anticipation. The Jedi had found a trace, a ripple, a broken energy trail through the swamps of Ambria, where the battle with Zannah had left a wound in the planet. They followed it, and when they arrived, they did not come as diplomats. They came armed. Lightsabers ready. 5 masters. 3 knights. Each one chosen not for power, but for certainty. They did not question their orders. They did not argue about balance or prophecy. They had felt it too. Whatever remained here was not a ghost. It was growing. And so, in silence, they stepped into the crater where the Force bent inward. There was no temple, no throne, no fortress, only a cave. Rocks, roots, and time. Inside that hollow, they saw a man. Not a warrior, not a creature. Just a figure sitting cross-legged in the dark, eyes closed. No armor, no blade. Only scars. And a voice that did not speak, but entered them. You should have come sooner. For a second, they hesitated. Not out of fear, out of confusion. Because the man before them did not look like a threat. He looked like a corpse. His skin was pale and dry, his muscles sunken. But his presence, it filled the cave like water. Not boiling, not raging. Still, heavy, endless. One of the knights stepped forward. He raised his blade. And Bane opened his eyes. The Force snapped like a whip. The knight flew backward, screaming before he even struck the wall. The other Jedi spread out, sabers igniting, yellow and green and blue. The light filled the cave, but it did not reach him. They didn't know it yet, but they were already too close. They had found the last Sith, and he had been waiting for them. Not to hide, not to run, but to teach them what had been forgotten. Through pain, through rage, through death, the Jedi spread out in a circle. Their blades hummed softly, a harmony of light meant to bring peace, but there was no peace here. Only the slow breathing of the man who had waited for them. Bane stood, his armor creaking, every movement deliberate. His eyes glowed faintly through the dark, reflecting the colors of their sabers. He did not ignite his weapon. He did not need to. The oldest among them, a Jedi master draped in white robes, stepped forward. His voice was calm but cracked with the weight of belief. "You are surrounded," he said. "Lay down your hatred. You've already lost." Bane tilted his head. "Lost?" He took a slow step closer. The air thickened, the shadows bending around him. You think the Sith could be destroyed by death. You think an idea can be burned. The Jedi held their ground, but they felt it, the chill that came not from fear but recognition. Something in his words knew them. You feel it, Bane whispered. The truth. You destroyed an army, not the order. Then he moved. The Force exploded outward. Stones shattered. Dust filled the air. The first Jedi fell before he could even see the strike. Bane's crimson blade ignited mid-motion, a flare of bloodlight against the storm. The second Jedi leapt high, blade spinning. Bane caught her midair with an invisible grip and crushed her spine before she landed. The cave roared with power. This was not combat, it was punishment. The Jedi fought with grace, precision, unity, the light working as one. But Bane fought like nature itself. Every movement carried weight, every swing carved through not just stone, but spirit. He had no anger left, only purpose. When his blade met theirs, the cave lit like lightning. The Masters tried to contain him, pushing him back with a wall of Force energy, a flood of light and will. He staggered. For a moment, the balance held. And then he smiled. Good, he said, show me what the light has left. He reached forward with both hands, not to attack but to pull. The Force obeyed. The light dimmed, the air folded inward, the cave itself groaned. They tried to resist, but their strength was scattered across too many hearts. He had only one, and it burned brighter than all of theirs combined. One Master dropped to his knees, clutching his chest. Another screamed as the pressure shattered his ribs. Only two remained standing. The Elder lifted his hand, summoning every ounce of the Force left in him. The glow filled the cavern, gold and radiant. Bane did not block. He let it strike him full on. The blast tore through the chamber, vaporizing rock, burning through armor. When the dust cleared, the Jedi fell to one knee, trembling. And through the haze, a shadow walked forward, still standing. Smoke rising from his skin. Armor cracked, flesh broken, but alive. Bane's lightsaber reactivated with a low hiss. He looked down at the dying Master and whispered, almost gently, "You fought well." Then he struck. No triumph, no laughter, just finality. The last Jedi fell without a sound. Only silence remained, and the storm outside began to break. Outside the cave, the world had stopped. Wind, once violent, now whispered across the scorched plains of Ambria. The trees no longer bent, the creatures no longer stirred. The Force had gone still like breath held too long. Inside, Bane stood alone. His chest heaved, not from exhaustion, from control. He had never fought like this before, not in the mines, not at the academy, not even on Ruusan. This wasn't survival. This was revelation. Every bone in his body ached. His muscles trembled beneath the weight of his own power. His armor had cracked across the ribs. His right hand bled through a tear in the gauntlet, but none of it mattered. Because he was still alive. And they weren't. 8 Jedi, Masters, Knights, all gone. No witnesses, no survivors, no trace. Only the echo. He stood over their bodies, and for a moment, he looked down, not in pity, not in hatred, but in reflection. This was the cost of letting them get too close. He had hoped to avoid it, not out of mercy, but secrecy. He wasn't ready to be seen. Not yet. He stepped outside the cave, the light of Ambria's red sun painting his armor with blood. Smoke rose from the ground where lightning had kissed the soil. The sand was scorched, glassed in places. A battlefield without war. Zannah was waiting for him. She didn't speak. She didn't bow. She just watched. He could see the thoughts behind her eyes, not concern, not fear, just calculation. She had felt everything through the Force, the confrontation, the deaths, the pain. And the moment he'd nearly faltered, he walked past her. She followed. They said nothing as they crossed the black plain, the silence between master and apprentice louder than any roar. Each step left a trail of ash, footprints that would be erased by the wind before nightfall. Bane's mind churned quietly. The Jedi knew now. They wouldn't come again so soon. They would argue, debate, deny, but eventually they would believe. That fear would take root, and when it did, their peace would begin to rot. He needed to move. He needed to disappear again. But more than that, he needed to recover. The ritual had taken too much. His body had already been failing. Now, it was worse. The skin beneath his armor was pale. The pain in his bones wasn't from battle, it was from decay. His connection to the Force was strong, but his flesh was breaking. Death wasn't a threat anymore. It was a deadline, and he could feel it breathing on his neck. He looked at Zannah. She walked with perfect posture, unflinching, untouched. The wind did not move her. Her hands were still clean, but not for long. That, too, was the rule. There would come a day when she would raise her hand against him, not in hate, not in rebellion, but in purpose. That day was not today, but it was closer than ever. They reached the edge of a canyon where the land split like a scar. Bane stopped and turned. He gazed into the distance, watching the red sky blur against the cracked horizon. Somewhere out there, the Jedi would speak of this day as myth. Some would deny it happened. Others would whisper of a dark presence returning. But no one would know the truth. Not yet. Because the Sith had not risen again. They had never died. And as long as even one remained, the galaxy would never be safe again. Night fell over Ambria like a closing wound. The last traces of battle vanished into the wind. Smoke, blood, and scorched metal sank into the sand, erased by the quiet. No light remained, only the dim reflection of stars trembling on the lake's black surface. Bane sat at the water's edge, armor heavy with dust. His reflection looked back at him, cracked and imperfect. The ripples warped his face into something barely human. He stared at it for a long time. Victory, he thought, had never felt so hollow. He had survived. Again. But survival was not triumph, not for him. The Jedi were dead, yet he knew they would return. They always did. The light never stayed buried for long. It waited like the sunrise, predictable, patient, but so was he. The rule of two was working, hidden, growing, quiet as infection. He turned his gaze upward. The stars above seemed distant, faint reminders of a galaxy that would never understand what had happened here. He had fought not for vengeance, not for conquest, but for preservation. The Sith were not meant to rule openly anymore. They were meant to evolve. And evolution required shadow. He felt Zannah's presence before she approached. Her footsteps were slow, measured. She knelt beside him, not as a student seeking praise, but as something else. Something colder. He didn't look at her. "The Jedi will come again," she said. "Yes," he replied softly. "They always do. They'll search this world. They'll find nothing. Zannah studied the horizon. Her voice was quiet. You shouldn't have fought them alone. Bane turned his head. For the first time in years, his expression almost resembled a smile. You think I needed help? No, she said, but you wanted to be seen. He didn't answer, because she was right. Part of him had wanted them to come, to witness the strength they could never destroy, to remind them that the dark was still watching. And now they would carry that fear home. A story whispered among masters, a warning turned myth. The Sith are gone, but not forgotten. The lake rippled, the wind shifted. Bane rose slowly, his body aching under its own weight. The force flowed through him dimmer than before, but still alive. Zannah stood beside him, eyes unreadable. In the starlight, she looked almost serene. He studied her face, her silence, her calm. There was power in it, a patience that mirrored his own, perhaps even surpassed it. He saw her future in that quiet, the moment that would one day come. The strike, the betrayal, the rule fulfilled. But not yet. He placed a hand on her shoulder. When I am gone, he said, the galaxy will forget this day. She nodded. That's how it should be. He stepped past her, toward the darkness of the canyon. His silhouette vanished into the red mist, the faint hum of his armor fading into nothing. Zannah watched until the sound was gone. Then she turned back to the lake. The wind whispered against the surface, soft and cold. In its ripples, she almost heard a voice, deep, distant, familiar. A voice that refused to die. Her reflection wavered, and for just a heartbeat, it wasn't hers. Then it was gone. The night grew still again. Ambria slept, and somewhere in the dark, the rule continued. Unseen, unbroken, waiting. Ambria was silent, but it was not peace. The wind that moved across the ash-covered plains was not alive. It was hollow. It whispered not in greeting, but in warning, like the breath of ghosts trapped beneath the ground. Long ago, this world had been broken by dark power. Now it waited to be broken again. Bane stood at the edge of that silence. His cloak stirred around him, heavy with dust. The air smelled of sulfur and memory. His armor, once shining, was dulled with time and blood. Beneath it, his body was failing. Not from age, but from power. The dark side had made him stronger than any Sith before him. But it had also devoured him from within. Every nerve burned. Every muscle screamed. And still, he stood. This was not weakness. It was proof. Proof that the galaxy's greatest weapon was not strength but purpose. That purpose had brought him here. Not to kill his apprentice. Not even to survive. But to complete the rule. Behind him, footsteps approached. Steady, measured, no longer the walk of a student. Zannah. He didn't turn to look. He didn't have to. He could feel her presence in the Force, sharp, focused, cold. She no longer trembled beneath his shadow. She had learned to walk through it. And now, she came to end it. She stopped 10 paces away. For a moment, there was only the wind between them. No words, no anger, just time. Time stretched by fate and held together by 1,000 unspoken thoughts. I knew you would choose this place, she said finally. Her voice was calm, not respectful, not cruel, just certain. Bane still didn't face her. This world was shaped by the dark side. Like us, like this moment. He turned. Their eyes met. Hers were quiet, but not soft. His were tired, but not weak. There was no hate between them. There didn't need to be. Hate was for enemies. This was legacy. "You believe you are ready," Bane said. "I don't believe," Zannah replied. "I know." He nodded once. "Then prove it." She moved first, no hesitation, no flourish. Her lightsaber ignited with a hiss that barely cut through the wind. Red light painted her face with flickers of death. Bane's blade came to life a breath later, slower, deeper in tone, like the growl of something ancient waking beneath the ground. When they clashed, the Force didn't scream, it shuddered. Zannah's style was precise, honed over years of studying his every move. She struck low, then high, twisting around his guard with the speed of a serpent. Bane met each blow not with speed, but with inevitability. His strength hadn't faded, it had become something heavier, denser, like gravity. For every strike she made, he answered with power that cracked stone. But she adapted. She always had. This wasn't just a duel. It was the rule in motion. One must survive. One must fall. She moved to his flank. He countered. Sparks burst from their blades. Her hand flicked, an invisible wave of force slammed toward him. He caught it mid-air, absorbing it with a snarl of focus. Dust spiraled. The ground trembled. But neither of them fell. Not yet. The duel stretched. Minutes became moments. Moments became memory. And in that memory, something deeper was unfolding. Bane wasn't just testing her strength. He was listening to the dark side, to the echo of destiny. Could she take it? Could she become it? Because if she couldn't, he would. Bane had trained her for this, not in a room, not with kind words, but across years of shadow and silence. Every lesson had been a wound, every truth, a scar. He did not teach her to win. He taught her to endure. And now, she was testing everything. Her attacks were fast, too fast for an apprentice. Her grip was sure. Her presence in the Force was no longer small. She filled the air with power. The kind of power that could silence a crowd without speaking. She had become what he hoped she would. But still, she wasn't ready. Not yet. Bane stepped back, drawing her deeper into the broken field. Stones cracked beneath their boots. Ash rose with each move, swirling like lost spirits. The planet itself seemed to watch. She came at him again this time, aiming for the joints in his armor, trying to break the man inside the myth. Her blade hissed. His parried. A flash of light between them, gone in a breath. He countered with a blow that forced her to stumble, then vanished before she could recover. He didn't press forward. He waited. He watched. She was still thinking like a student, calculating, anticipating, measuring him. He had no time for that. "You hesitate," he said, stepping into view once more. "You seek weakness in me, but I am not your obstacle. I am your final test." Zannah wiped blood from the edge of her brow. She didn't blink. "I'm not hesitating," she said. "I'm evolving." That answer pleased him more than she could know. But it still wasn't enough. Bane raised his hand. The Force surged around it like a storm. She braced, but it wasn't a push. It was a strike, cold, invisible, silent. It slipped past her defenses and seized her heart. For a moment, it stopped beating. She dropped to one knee, gasping. Bane approached slowly, lightsaber idle in one hand. Compassion is weakness. Doubt is failure. But fear, he paused, watching her chest rise again. Fear is the beginning of strength. She coughed, forcing herself back to her feet. Her blade reignited, her stance was unshaken. "I'm not afraid," she whispered. He could feel the lie. but he could also feel something else. A shift. She was learning not just how to fight, but how to think like him. That was the beginning of the end. Bane stepped into the fight once more, this time abandoning defense. He attacked with full force. Blades met in bursts of red light. Their movements blurred. Each blow from him tested the core of her being, and each block from her answered with a truth he had long feared. She was becoming more than his equal, and deep down, he wasn't sure if he wanted her to. Because with every second, the future grew closer. A future without him. A Sith line, not bearing his face, but hers. And still he struck. Zannah's eyes glowed with focus, her arms ached. But she didn't retreat. She circled. She adapted. She used his momentum to turn his weight against him. She was no longer reacting, she was rewriting. For the first time, Bane faltered. It was small, a slip of footing, a breath late, but he felt it. And so did she. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. But she moved in a way that told him everything. She knew. He pushed forward harder, deeper, faster, as if by will alone he could erase the decay in his limbs. He roared not in anger, but defiance. The dark side screamed with him. But even as he fought, a thought lingered. If she defeated him, would it be a betrayal? Or would it be his greatest success? Zannah never wanted to love him. That would have made things harder. She never hated him either. That would have made things easier. What she felt was something colder, something more honest. A kind of silent gratitude, wrapped in the promise of extinction. He had made her strong, but strength wasn't a gift. It was a debt. And now, she had come to collect. Their blades sang through the dust again. Sparks burst and vanished like dying stars. He was heavier, stronger, and still full of rage. But she was no longer the girl he found on Ruusan. She was something different now, sharper, quieter, deadlier. Bane struck high, Zannah ducked low. His boot twisted, her fingers flicked. The earth cracked beneath them both. Each move spoke a language only the Sith understood, where love meant power and death was proof of loyalty. She could feel his strength slipping, not all at once, just enough. Every block from him came slower, every breath louder. The dark side still flowed through him, but it wasn't pure anymore. It was warped, tainted by rituals, hunger, desperation. He was no longer evolving. He was holding on. She had waited years for this. Not to kill him, but to know that he could be killed. His eyes narrowed. He knew she saw it. And that's when he tried to end it. He dropped his blade and reached into her mind like a dagger. Raw power surged across the space between them, ancient, cruel, unbearable. He wasn't attacking her body. He was ripping at her thoughts, tearing open every fear, every wound, showing her the truth of what he really was. Not a warrior, a weapon. Zannah screamed, but her feet held, her saber flickered, her fingers shook. Inside her head, images crashed and burned her uncle's voice, the smell of the battlefield, the first body she ever broke with the Force. All of it twisted into a storm of memory and agony. But even through the pain, she understood. He was teaching her. One last time. This was the lesson. Not how to fight, but how to endure what could not be fought. She opened her eyes. The pain was still there. His presence was still there. But she did not flinch. She let it pass through her like wind through broken glass. Let it cut. Let it scar. Let it teach. And then she pushed back. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was precise. Zannah did not claw his mind. She invaded it like a whisper. She followed the path he carved into her and reversed it, slipped inside the cracks, dug deeper, found the places he had hidden even from himself. And there she found fear. He tried to close it. Too late. She saw it. The fear of being forgotten, of training a successor who would erase him, of becoming a name with no face, a myth with no soul. The fear of time and the end of all things. Bane howled and struck again, forcing her back with raw fury. But the moment had shifted. Something inside him had unraveled, and he knew it. Zannah did not press the advantage. Not yet. She just stood there, watching. Not as a child, not as an apprentice. As the future. For the first time, he wasn't sure what she would do next, and in that silence, something terrifying occurred to him. She didn't want to win because she hated him. She wanted to win because she believed in the rule of two. That truth cut deeper than her blade ever could. And still, he lifted his saber again. Because it wasn't over. Not yet. The wind died around them. The rocks stopped trembling. The force itself seemed to pause. And then, they moved. Bane lunged with everything he had left. It was not elegant. It was not measured. It was fury distilled into movement. The last of him poured into a single moment. Zannah met it, not with strength, but with precision. Their blades clashed, but it was no longer about form, no longer about speed. It was will against will. He forced her back, step by step, his strikes wild, devastating. But she absorbed them, bent around them, letting the storm pass through her. She had learned what he had never said. The body ends, the mind remains. He growled as his muscles gave out. His right arm trembled, his grip faltered for a breath. And that was enough. Zannah struck low, a feint. He blocked. She pivoted, turning her body sideways, and with a flick of her wrist, disarmed him. His saber fell to the dust with a hiss. He reached out to summon it. She crushed it with a thought. He stared at her, chest heaving, eyes wide. The armor that had once made him invincible now weighed him down like a tomb. But he didn't beg. He didn't speak. He reached again, not with hands, but with mind. And then, everything shattered. The force twisted inward. It bent around him like a vortex. Bane wasn't trying to kill her anymore. He was trying to become her. It was a secret few knew, a ritual from the darkest Sith archives, essence transfer, a forbidden technique. If done with absolute control, the user could abandon their dying body and claim another. Zannah felt it like fire pouring into her skull. His voice echoed behind her thoughts. His rage filled her chest. Her hands shook as her memories slipped, twisted, blurred. She saw his past, felt his pain, the mines, the war, the hunger. It all slammed into her. He was forcing his identity into hers, trying to erase her. It wasn't a battle of lightsabers anymore. It was a war of spirits. And it hurt. Zannah screamed, not out loud, but within. Every part of her being lit up with fire. She was losing pieces of herself. Her name, her memories, her reason. Everything was turning into him. But she fought. Not with emotion, not with fear, with belief. She held on to one thought, one law, one name, Zannah. She remembered who she was. The girl who survived Ruosan. The apprentice who watched, who waited, who learned. The Sith who understood that survival wasn't enough. Legacy mattered. and legacy required sacrifice. She burned his thoughts out of her mind, one by one. His victories, his pride, his fear. She didn't push him out. She erased him. The Force went silent. Zannah dropped to her knees, shaking. Smoke rose from her skin. Her veins pulsed black for a moment, then cleared. Behind her, Bane's body collapsed into the dirt. Empty. The dust began to settle. She stood, slow, unsteady. But when she opened her eyes, they were not Bane's. They were hers. She did not weep. There was no triumph. Only silence. The kind that came after thunder. The kind that followed the end of something old. She buried his body on Ambria, beneath stone and ash, where no one would find him. No monument, no grave, just silence. He had tried to live forever. But she understood something deeper. It was not enough to survive. The rule of two demanded renewal. And she was its future. As she left Ambria behind, her robes caught the wind. One master, one apprentice, always, until death proves the truth. They thought the Sith were gone, erased, finished. The Jedi had won the war. The Republic had survived. But what they didn't know was that the Sith had finally learned how to win. After the thought bomb, after the crater on Ruusan swallowed the Brotherhood, there were no more grand armies, no more temples burning in the name of conquest. There was only one, and she vanished. Zannah, the girl once called Rain, the apprentice who walked out of the ashes with the teachings of a dead master and the future of the Sith in her hands. She did not build, she did not gather, she watched. She learned, she waited, and she trained her own. That was the legacy Bane left behind. Not a kingdom, not an empire, a rule, a chain, a shadow that could never be cut. There were no more Sith Lords screaming their power into the stars, only whispers, only death in silence. One master, one apprentice, always. They became myths, rumors, scars in the Force too deep to explain. The Jedi searched, but there was nothing to find. Because Bane had killed the Sith, to save the Sith, and through the rule of two, he ensured that no one would ever see them again, not until it was too late. One by one, they rose, one by one, they fell. Each master carried the same burden, to teach without mercy and die without regret. That was the price of the rule. To be betrayed was not failure, it was success. But not all Sith welcomed it. Some tried to hide, some tried to survive their own apprentice, and in doing so, they broke the rule, shattering the very power that kept the Sith alive. But others understood. Darth Cognus, Darth Millennial, Darth Vectivus, each name spoken rarely, if ever. Their legacies buried deep, even among the Sith, yet their choices carved invisible wounds into the galaxy. Not with armies, not with fire, but with secrets, with patience, with rot. They worked from the shadows, quietly, deliberately, moving pieces across centuries, cults, corruption, wars that never seemed to end, planets that fell and never knew why. The Jedi never noticed. How could they? To them, the Force was balance, peace, harmony. But for the Sith, the Force was hunger, and hunger waits. So the rule of two endured, even when it broke, even when apprentices killed too early or masters grew too weak. The line never ended, only changed. It was a whisper passed through blood, through pain, through time itself. And every voice in that chain, still echoed with one name: Bane. They say Darth Bane died on Ambria, but no one truly knows. Some say Zannah destroyed him. Others believe his spirit remained twisted inside her mind, hiding behind her thoughts, whispering through her fingers. A shadow pretending to be gone. Because that was the final lesson. Not to kill the master, but to become him. Zannah wore the name. She held the power. She followed the rule. But in quiet moments, she heard his voice. In the stillness of meditation, in the rage before battle, he was there. Not in body, not in memory, but in something deeper. The Force did not forget him. Centuries passed. Masters taught apprentices. Apprentices killed masters. And still, Bane remained, not as a ghost, not as a soul, but as a thought, a rule, an idea sharp enough to cut the galaxy in half. His will shaped Darth Tenebris, who shaped Darth Plagueis, who shaped Darth Sidious. And Sidious was different. He didn't just follow the rule, he perfected it. Where Bane worked from the shadows, Sidious became the shadow. He used democracy, not armies, lies, not lightsabers. And by the time the Jedi saw him, it was already over. But it wasn't Sidious who won. It was Bane. Because the galaxy didn't fall in a war. It fell in silence. A silence that began in the minds of Apatros. When Darth Sidious watched the Republic burn, the stars above Coruscant flickered like dying candles. The Jedi were gone. The Senate bowed. The galaxy was his. But in the quiet, when the echoes of his own laughter faded, he heard it. A voice, low, patient, familiar. It did not speak words. It didn't need to. It was the sound of the rule itself. The same hunger that had begun in the dark tunnels of Apatros. The same will that had survived Ruusan. The same presence that had whispered to Zannah and to every Sith who came after. Darth Bane had not cheated death. He had become it. His teachings lived in every deception, every betrayal, every spark of cruelty that shaped the Sith across 1,000 years. He was the ghost inside every victory, the shadow beneath every throne, the quiet reminder that power was never owned, only inherited. The Jedi thought the Sith were destroyed, but destruction was the Sith's design. Death was never the end. It was the proof of strength, the moment where one will devour another, a ritual older than any temple. Written not in words, but in blood. And when Sidious declared himself emperor, when the galaxy trembled beneath his hand, the rule spoke once more through him. One master, one apprentice, always. And in that moment, the Sith did not rise again. They simply returned home.